Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. So I have to offer an apology and make an official retraction of the video I did yesterday on gendered violence in Spain. Turns out I read the numbers wrong and I completely misinterpreted the report. I watched the video again this morning and I saw my error, and so I have to make a correction video. And unfortunately, it's even worse than I initially thought. So let's see what I'm talking about. Now, before we start, there's something you have to understand. Spain has a special system for domestic violence. It is a special court system for domestic violence established in 2004. But here's the thing, it only recognizes female victims. So keep that in mind because it's important going forward. Okay, so once again, here's a website from the National Institute of Statistics. This is a government organization, so this is official data for the country of Spain. Take a look at the part that I highlighted. The total persons recorded as victims of gender or domestic violence in 2021 reached 38,715, 2.4% more than in 2020. Of these, 35,359 were women and 3,356 were men. So basically, women are 10 times more likely to be victims. But victims of what? Keep in mind this phrase here, gender or domestic violence. That's going to be important in a second. So here are the stats on gender violence. What's defined as gender violence? And you'll notice that for each year, if you go by year 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, you look at the top line, it says victims, women. The second line, persons, men. They're almost identical numbers. And I should have known last night. I thought it was very suspiciously close. The top line, notice women is labeled victims. And then the second line, men, is persons reported. So this isn't showing the victims by gender. This is showing how the top line are the female victims, and the second line are the male perpetrators. This isn't showing the victims by gender. This is just showing female victims and male perpetrators. Now, you may be wondering, well, where's the section on male victims of gender violence? Well, the reason why you don't see it is because it doesn't exist. And the reason why it doesn't exist is because of the definition of gender violence. This is what it says. Gender violence. Gender violence is understood as any physical or psychological act of violence, including attacks on sexual freedom, threats, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of freedom, carried out against a woman by a man who is or has been her spouse, or who is or has been linked to her by a similar sentimental relationship, even if without cohabitation. So, the reason why there aren't any male victims of gendered violence on that table isn't because they don't exist, it's because they aren't even recorded. So that's why I changed the title from last night from Feminists Are Wrong About Domestic Violence to Feminists Lie About Domestic Violence. Now remember, Spain has a special legal system, a special court system for domestic violence, but it only recognizes female victims. Male victims do not have access to this court and do not have equal protection from domestic violence. That said, let's go back to the stats on domestic violence. And here you can see by year. In the year 2017, now the top column, this is all victims. The top column are male victims. The second column below are female victims. In 2017, there were 2,500 male victims and 4,300 female victims. In 2018, there were 2,700 male victims and 4,500 female victims. In 2019, there were 2,900 male victims and 4,700 female victims. In 2020, there were 3,100 male victims and 5,000 female victims. And in 2021, there were 3,100 male victims and 5,000 female victims. So yes, feminists may say that there are less male victims than female victims, but if you do the math on those numbers, male victims are a little more than 1/3 of victims. So why do 1/3 of victims deserve to be ignored or get lesser treatment? I mean, you wouldn't make the argument that because women are less likely to be injured at the job site, because women are less likely to do manual labor, that therefore the laws for worker compensation shouldn't include women, and that women who are injured at work shouldn't have the same rights as men who are injured at work, because overall men are more likely to be injured. No, that makes no sense. You would treat an injured man and an injured woman equally. But in Spain, male and female victims are not treated equally because the courts for domestic violence only recognize women. Now, of course, that doesn't mean domestic violence against men is completely ignored and totally legal, because the stats do recognize that male victims exist. But you have to wonder, if there's a special court system for domestic violence that only recognizes women and doesn't recognize men, maybe there are many male victims who are not being counted and not being recorded at all. That's something else to think about. So, unfortunately, the situation in Spain is even worse than I thought when I made the video last night. And this is why I say feminists lie when it comes to gendered violence. They say, oh, well, women are 10 times more likely to be victims than men. But they don't even count male victims at all, because the definition of gendered violence doesn't even include men by the definition. So therefore, how can you have male victims of gendered violence if the definition of gendered violence doesn't count men in the first place? And when it comes to domestic violence, if you have a special court system that doesn't recognize male victims, how can you be confident that you're counting all of the male victims? This is what MRAs are talking about when we say that the Spanish system discriminates against male victims.